Hello and welcome to a new episode of How to Build a Theatre, a podcast charting the creation of a new theatre for Brussels while looking at the wider theatre industry. My name is Edward Macmillan.
And my name is Phil Wilcox, and it's great to be here again, Ed. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Brussels is very cold. We're recording this in December. How is it in London?
Also very, very cold. We had a bit of a sort of frost, a big freeze about 4 or 5 days ago. Some lovely snow, actually. It was so unusual for us to get snow in the south of England, particularly for before Christmas at all. And we had maybe a good 4 or 5 inches, which was very nice. And it's stayed cold.
Jealous of the snow. Where we rarely gets cold enough here in the centre of the city where I am based.
Right, so we need an update on the bridge. What is going on this frosty December month?
So the status remains actually quite similar to how it has been the previous 2 times we've spoken. Apparently, my mum told me that I actually said too much on the previous podcast, our most devoted listener, my mum, because I actually said something about a potential location that we had found, and actually I wasn't going to release details of that quite yet. But anyway, if you're interested to know more, you can listen to last month's episode. But anyway, we're still exploring this potential venue, but actually we are lost in the dystopian world that is Brussels bureaucracy and trying to work out how, from a legal and permit point of view, we can progress with potentially renting this venue, which we have identified. So that's quite dull, I would say, and not very artistically rewarding. However, I now am seeing the light at the end of the tunnel for that, and I'm been very happy with the amount of support we've had from the various people, stakeholders, if you will, in Brussels, various people we have been meeting throughout the past year. And it's been good to see that they want this to happen as much as we do. It's more a question of bureaucratically, how do we get it to happen?
It's pertinent to this particular podcast because we know that behind all artistic, certainly anything that's sort of artistic and wants to be, in a certain sense as well, commercial or viewed on a bigger plane. An artist who could just create works in their bedroom and they could never be seen by the light of day or anyone other than them and their family. But anything that wants to be shared a bit, there's a huge amount of administration and bureaucracy and things to follow and health and safety, marketing, payments, taxes, all that sort of, there's a huge amount of stuff goes on behind the scenes to make sure that art with the world. So it's important that it's done.
Yeah, exactly. And this is all very much out of our comfort zone, especially my comfort zone. And so it's a lot of finding out, okay, what are the rules? What do we need to do? Who can help us to follow those rules, especially in a country. So still the majority of the team members behind the Bridge Theatre are non-Belgian, and therefore we can't draw on the local networks of people so easily that you would if you were living in your native country. I feel that's something that I have felt whilst doing this project. It's not like we know lots of, I don't know, architects, for example, or people who can help in the kind of building regulation sphere, and we've had to really create a network of supporters around us in order to facilitate this kind of exchange with the people who are experts in building management and regulations and things, which is, yes, an extra kind of hurdle that we've had to overcome, I think.
Is it? We must get our guest on in a second just as well, who's waiting very patiently for us, listening to our spiel, our opening spiel. But just one question before we go on too much about, before our guest. Certainly, I think in the UK, you mentioned forming a company based in the country in which you've lived. there's a lot to be said for the network. The I've got someone who knows someone. My uncles are such and such. Oh yes, cousin such and such is married to whoever is, And at the worst side of it, it's a bit of an old boys club. I went to school with this person and went to school with that person. We went to the same uni, but even that can bring out positive change. Do you find that there's a lot of that in Brussels? Is there a sort of a network of connected people like that, and is it easy to get into, or does it feel a bit restrictive?
There is, yes. I mean, that's definitely how it works in Belgium. Belgian people keep close contact with their school friends, especially, it seems, as an outsider perspective. And that means they end up knowing people in a lot of different industries. I think for me and the other members of our team, especially Ava, when we came here, we were very much in the bubble, the European bubble, meaning that we basically, our original network, let's say, was basically policy wonks and journalists and lobbyists, like political lobbyists, which isn't so useful when you're trying to do something practical like make a theatre. However, people are very willing to help, so it's just a matter of finding the right person to ask, and then maybe they will know someone who might know someone else who might know someone else, and it's really following this trail through until you find someone who is actually very useful. And there's been a couple of times, I think, where we've met someone along our journey of meeting people who have been very instrumental in helping us push forward. And I think it's just you have to meet a lot of people in order to find the right people, essentially.
Speaking of meeting people, maybe we should meet our guest.
Yes, I think that sounds like a lovely idea, Phil. So our guest this week is a gentleman called Kevin Dyer. He is a dramaturg, he is a writer, and I believe, Kevin, you're also an actor, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I call myself a theatre maker, which is a bit of an umbrella term for those of us that do more than one job. But it says what it does. I do make theatre, and I use different skills at different times.
Which I very much support, and I feel also to be a theatre maker myself. So I like that you use this umbrella term, theatre maker, and welcome to the show, Kevin. Phil, would you like to do the honours?
We should start, yeah. So, Kevin, they're very easy. They're almost run-of-the-mill, maybe. I don't know if we've had any feedback, but maybe my questions are too run-of-the-mill. Just some standard quick-fire questions to build the image of Kevin Dyer, if that's all right. But they're super easy, I promise. So, the first one is, do you have a favourite season of the year?
Well, I have to say I love weather. I really love the weather. I live in a rural place. And although you're in London at the moment with 5 inches of snow, cities do sort of blanket or disguise the weather a lot. So I'm living out here where I do. I just love all the changes. That's a bit of a non-answer, isn't it? To be honest, it's -8 at the moment, so I'll be quite happy for a bit of summer. I'm going to say summer.
It was if I may, it was a very dramaturgist answer. It was a very good one. Are you, when you're out for a meal, are you a starter and main person, or a main and dessert person, or an all three person?
Probably not an all three, and I do find desserts the most disappointing. I think it's because I'm so excited for the dessert, but when it comes, I go, that really wasn't worth €15, was it? It just wasn't.
I can understand that, I think. Often just a couple of squares of chocolate will do.
I agree with you. I agree 100%.
Linked to food, then, do you have a favourite drink? Maybe even a drink for a particular time of day?
Well, I drink peppermint tea all the time. I used to drink that brown tea, that thing that the English drink, and I used to drink 12 or 15 cups a day. And one day I decided, I'm just going to stop. And I thought I was going to get all those withdrawal symptoms, like people do when they're coming off Class A drugs. But it didn't make any difference. It was fine. Nothing happened. So I thought, well, it's no big shakes, is it? So why am I bothering to drink that caffeine stuff? So I don't do it anymore.
That's amazing. I get the coffee. If I don't have a second coffee by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I get a little headache.
Well, maybe all my nerve endings are shot to pieces, so I can't tell the difference.
Imagine if you were on 12 to 14. That's amazing. So, a cats or dogs person, or any particular animal that you find?
I've had some very nice relationships with dogs, but actually I'm a runner, so I spend a lot of time on the towpaths and the paths of Britain, and I don't dislike dogs, but I really dislike many dog owners.
Yeah.
So I'm a little coloured by them chasing me, barking and showing their teeth. And cats generally don't do that, so I'm probably more of a cat person.
And dog owners who don't pick up after their dogs, that's not a good thing.
It's not good, is it? It's not good.
Any fears or phobias?
Apart from dogs?
Apart from dogs.
No, I think it is. I think I'm probably more frightened of dogs than anything else.
Oh, right.
Just because I bear the scars.
Literally on your ankles.
Yes.
Just a couple more then. So I'm always interested. This will always enter my questions because I'm interested in it. Early bird or night owl?
I'm an early bird.
What's sort of early?
Well, theatre early means we start rehearsals at 10 o'clock in the morning. So that's not early at all,
that's
is it?
early enough.
But I find
that's early for me.
As a writer, if I can get stuff done in the morning, it makes the rest of the day more palatable.
True, so true. Did you have well? This is a two-part question, I suppose. Did you have a favourite subject at school when you were studying? And also linked to that, was there one that you were just particularly good at, whether it was your favourite or not?
It's often about the quality. It's often about the teacher, isn't it? I think a lot of us, we have great experiences at school because we have a teacher that really, that's listened to us, that understands us. And I did have some really splendid teachers who were interested in writing or interested in literature. You know, when I did my A-levels, I had a female teacher there called Mrs. Burnett, and she was just remarkable because of her enthusiasm. And enthusiasm is an infectious thing. Things I was good at, oddly enough, I was very good at logic and mathematics. And so I followed it. I went on to university and read, and I was in Scotland, so I read a number of subjects. One of them was philosophy, and we did formal logic, and that was probably the best thing I've ever been good at in my life.
Do you find that I can imagine that our listeners will be able to link logic and certainly philosophy with the idea of theatre creation and certainly writing? Do you find that maths plays an important part in theatre?
Well, it's about patterns, isn't it? And it's about sequences and order. And I think narratives are like that. They have shape and structure. But also, thinking clearly is really important. The word art is overused, I think. I don't know whether I call myself an artist, but I am a technician. I am a craftsperson. So being able to handle materials and also to identify what the problem is, I think that's for me as a dramaturg and as a writer and as a director is, let's find out what the problem is and let's separate all the problems and then try and tackle them one at a time. And I think that's a mathematical, logical thing that helps my process anyway.
So yes, you gave us a little glimpse. You call yourself a theatre maker, and I think it would just be interesting for us to hear a little bit about how you came to be that and what your rough journey was? You said you went to study in Scotland. You have a very logical mind. And how did your, I guess, your relationship with theatre start and grow?
Sometimes we don't know our influences until much, much later, do we? When I was in primary school, I must have been about 8, I wrote a story and my teacher, Peter Fox, typed it up and told me it was good. And that thing about somebody giving me permission to be a writer was hugely important, although I don't think I knew that until I was about 35, when I thought about it again. Also, about the same time, I was in a school play, playing some character who defeated a dragon or something. And I don't remember the performance, but I do remember my dad sitting at the bottom of my bed, helping me learn my lines. And I came from a house where we never did bedtime stories. And my parents were busy, they were working all the time, just trying to make ends meet. And oddly enough, I think I have this little emotional connection with being in theatre through my dad helping me learn my lines when I was a boy. Third one is when I was 15, I went to see an amateur production of Waiting for Godot in a local theatre, the Rose in Kidderminster, which is not the cultural capital of the world. And all my life I'd just been watching soap operas with my parents and watching the TV. The TV was on during the meals all the time. And then I went to the theatre and I saw this thing and I thought, oh heavens, this is something I've never ever experienced before. You know, that guy with the rope round his neck being pulled across the stage, and the whole thing about how stories are told, particularly Godot, how characters can be different. It really did open a door. And they were fantastic, those performers. They were just, in that they changed my life. I don't know who they are. They were just amateur performers. They were probably a bank manager and a welder. But it was a fundamental thing in making me realise that television isn't the only place where stories are told.
Okay, so you had this beginning of the sparks at the beginning, and then what happened? How did you follow through, and how did you get to where you are today, I guess?
Well, to be honest, I always thought that I wasn't going to be the actor because I never had the confidence to do that. I didn't go to youth theatre or anything like that. It would have been just too scary. So when I work with teenagers now, and sometimes they're feeling a little anxious about entering a space for the first time, I just always tell them, well, you're doing far better than I did when I was your age, because I just stayed at home. I went to university. When I was at university, there was an amateur production of a show, and I was in Scotland, and they needed somebody with an English accent. And somebody asked me, and I got the part just because I was the only English guy around. And I did think, oh, actually, this is all right, isn't it? I can do this. So in some ways, working as an actor did profoundly change me as an outgoing human being. You know, I don't think I had social anxiety disorder before then, but I was anxious, and I was quite a shy sort of guy. I'm pretty gregarious, to be honest, but going, like many people, going to spaces where I don't know people can still be a bit scary. But I sort of stumbled into theatre in that way, and I was working in an office at that time, and I thought, I can't do the office thing any longer. So I applied to do a postgraduate diploma as a director. And I applied for a directing course, wanting to write something, but in the end came out an actor. While I was on this course, all I did was act. I acted for a year in 15 different productions, and then from there formed my own theatre company, and then worked in regional theatre companies and TV across the UK. But it came from me being an English guy in a Scottish community, and they didn't have any English dudes. That was it.
How often do you hear that as well? A career in arts, particularly if it seems in acting, because often I suppose someone who's 6'2" and has this accent and looks a bit like this and can fit the is how many great careers have been founded on a happy chance, a kind of, oh well, yeah, you fit the bill. We just need you for a couple of days on set or whatever, or could you join our troupe for a bit?
Yeah, because while I was at university, I was really interested in plays by then. But in that academic way, that reading of plays, which, to be honest, has virtually nothing to do with theatre. I learnt nothing. I did an English degree, and one of my modules was drama, but I learnt nothing about theatre, which was, I didn't understand until much later. And I did write a couple of plays whilst I was at university, and they were terrible. They were the worst plays in the world. Because, to be honest, I just hadn't seen enough theatre. I didn't know anything. So it was much later on when I decided I don't want on my grave written, Kevin Dyer, he wrote some very bad plays. So I decided, I'm going to try and work out how plays work. That's what I'm going to do. There must be a way of doing this properly, mustn't there? So I went on a little personal quest to find out what that was.
And so that was while you were studying, a similar experience of going to music college expecting to do one thing. In my case, it was musicology and composition, coming out being a singer. And I can chart the change, I think, I'm pretty sure. And again, like Ed says, it sort of comes down to a few individuals who just sort of gently nudged me through. Could you do that? Could you chart, thinking back now, you were doing what made you happy, you were doing what people wanted you to do. Could you chart the point at which you or the journey that you took to go from, I want to write and direct, to actually, I like this acting thing?
Well, I've never been very good at strategy in terms of my own career development. I probably should have been. I probably should have done that. But I often just went with what people asked me to do. As an actor, if somebody asked me to do something, I'd just say, yeah, that sounds fun. Yeah, that sounds fun. People ask me to write something. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. And that's, if I went back 20 odd years, I would have sat down with a piece of paper one Tuesday morning and said to myself, well, what do I want to do in 5 years' time? Where do I want my work to go on? Where do I want to perform? But I never really asked myself those questions. And I think that's because it's about class, really. It's about, as I mentioned before, my dad was a builder, my mum was a cleaner. They weren't business people. They never did strategy. They never did forward planning. They just survived day by day by day.
I think that's interesting. That chimes. I was having a conversation with a lawyer. So he's, if you see the hierarchy, he's high up. He's involved in taking in new cohorts of trainees. And we were discussing about our different careers. And he was saying, what are you up to at the moment? I was saying, obviously, freelance, musician, all the sort of usual stuff that goes along with that. And then I was asking him about his position in the firm and what he's doing with these new trainees. And we found a very interesting coincidence in just that, the formation of a freelance career. And you can either be one who's sort of constantly looking up, and I was the same thing. I was just sort of, you just go where the next gig takes you. You might look out for a few things which interest you and apply for them, and that feels like a step forward. But similar to you, I was never someone who sat down and thought, right, well, I want to go from here to that training program, to that place, to that place. And he said one of the interesting questions or the question that he asked these lawyers, because you could come into law and be a human rights lawyer and earn no money, but be very fulfilled. Or you could come in, and if you want to earn lots of money, you've got to be this type of lawyer. You've got to be a personal lawyer or something like that, or a business lawyer, accountancy lawyer. He said, so in which case, turn it on its head, and he asks these trainees, in 10 years' time, his question was, in what house do you want to live? In what do you see in your mind? Do you see a townhouse in Mayfair, or do you see a pile in the country, or do you see a flat in a small town? Do you see, where do you see yourself, and then work back from there? Because he then said that he would sort of chart the way that they could get there, or it would at least help them chart their way.
I mean, this goes back to my feeling of control as a freelancer. I always felt out of control as a freelancer, and I think that in a way, what you're saying, Phil, it feels like that should be part of arts education. This kind of the strategizing that Kevin lacked, and I don't think I'm sure there's many artists out there who definitely just take the jobs as they come along, and they don't necessarily have this long-term vision at all. Some do, I'm sure, but I would imagine the majority don't.
Well, it's interesting for me. One of the changes that I made was to become a writer and a director, because I felt I had more control, more artistic and creative control. I loved being an actor. It was, it did all those things that acting does. But I just thought somebody else was making all the interesting decisions. And I wanted to make the interesting decisions myself.
I fully relate with that statement, for sure. I would like to. So then you I guess you explored more writing and directing. So we brought, which would be interesting to hear about. Absolutely. So we brought you onto this podcast also to talk a little bit about dramaturgy, or dramaturgy, however you want to say it, and what that is. So maybe you could explain at this point the difference between what is a writer and what is a dramaturg for our listeners.
Can I go back just a fraction? The transformation for me of going from actor to writer was that I was working with a lot of devising companies, and I got fed up with being in plays that had no ending. I thought, somebody has to write this damn thing. And there wasn't a writer in the room. And I thought, I'm not going to go out on stage again with a play that fizzles out. So I just started within companies taking on the role of shaping and deciding how the narrative would end. And somebody said to me, oh, you should do this, you should do this writing thing. And again, that was probably the second person in my life who told me that I could write. So that's what I did.
So it was quite an organic process, I guess, in a way.
Yes, yeah, it was. When I was young, I wanted to write for newspapers because that was the only way I could see writing having an output. I didn't know that writers wrote plays. I didn't know they wrote film scripts. All I knew was my local newspaper. And I thought, I want to write, so that's what I'm going to do, isn't it? Mm. And I did work on newspapers and magazines. That was a step, if you like, in me becoming a person that uses words, a person that organises commas on a page. That's what I do.
Does that, what you've just described there as well, the process of taking a piece that part or all of which might be in existence, but then working it and finessing it and finding out what's wrong with it, or what could be different, or what could be better in it, is that to you what defines dramaturg rather than writer per se?
It is really. I think we see lots of plays and we think, why isn't it better? And I think often it's because somewhere in the process they haven't brought in an outside eye and somebody who just knows how plays work. I think often some writers just know how to do it all on their own and they're just incredible. But most of us, it's helpful to have somebody read it and somebody support both us as a writer and also support the play and help it on its way, to help articulate what it is actually. Often when I work with writers, the first thing I do is say, I think this is what you've got. And then they can measure that with what they think they're writing. I think that's, for me, one of the first stages. I think that first read of a script is really, really important.
about knowing how a play should be shaped, structured. Is this from your intuition, from having seen and read plays, or how do you have this sense?
I That's complicated, isn't it? Because we don't. There is an academic world of dramaturgy now. There are two sorts of drama. Well, there are three sorts of dramaturg. There are those who learn it at university and get a degree in dramaturgy. There are those, like me, I suppose, who call themselves dramaturgs because they've been asked by many, many people to look at their scripts and talk about them. And there are also those people who are probably directors who do it and don't even know they're doing it. That script fixing thing. But I do think a dramaturg is a job that is designated increasingly. You know, Germany was way ahead of us, and Canada still is way ahead of us. But here in the UK, we're just beginning to understand that a dramaturg is a different thing depending on the context. Some dramaturgs are employed just by the writer, so their responsibility is just for the writer. Some dramaturgs are employed by a theatre company, so if you like, they're as responsible to the theatre company as the writer. But I think, and that's your question, what do dramaturgs know? I think one thing they know is they know a lot of plays. So they can say to a writer, you can't really use that because it's just come up too often in the past. You know, or a dramaturg can say, I think you're not ending the story of this character very well. Or a dramaturg can say, you think you're writing about character A, but actually the most interesting character in this story is character B. How does a dramaturg know that? It's a bit about personal taste, but it's a bit about observing how other plays work. What's interesting, of course, is that as writers, we always want to write a play that's never been written before. We don't want to follow the patterns and the rules that Arthur Miller used, that Shakespeare used. We don't want to write 5 acts anymore, although filmmakers seem to be obsessed with it. You know, a lot of contemporary writers are trying to write new things. So I think that often the job of a dramaturg is to have an understanding of how many, many plays that have already been written work and help the writer to write something that's never been written before.
I suppose it might be tricky sometimes to convince a writer to include a dramaturg in the process, because I think there's a sort of romance, and for even people who are commissioning work, a currency in the name. You know, it's such and such by someone, one person, and the idea that one person creates a piece of art, which in itself, really, if you're in the game, if you know theatre, if you know plays, if you know even music and opera and stuff like that, you know it's not one person. It wasn't just the composer who created this opera. It was also the original director, the librettist, the person who, the mate of the librettist, who, when the librettist didn't know what to write for the next scene, took it down to the pub and had a pint with him and said that, you know, it really is a team effort. And the idea that one person, one writer, just has total control over everything, to be honest, it's a bit arrogant on the assumption of the writer. Maybe they are, you know, the genius. They can create everything and it could be absolutely perfect. But it's also, it's just a bit dangerous, like you say, because it doesn't take into consideration anybody else's experience, like lived experience, but also professional experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I know as a writer, my job, I have the responsibility to get that script ready for day one of rehearsals. And I don't want to mess up on that. Mm. So if somebody can help me iron out the little knots, or tell me that the first scene is boring, I'm gonna jump on that advice. Just jump on it.
Do you often find yourself working with the same writers, or is it very much project by project based? How does it work? Because I guess it's quite an intimate relationship in a way that you have to have with a writer as a dramaturg and vice versa.
I think the relationship really is important, and it's based on trust, isn't it? You have to trust your dramaturg. You really have to. But also the other side of that is the dramaturg. Some dramaturgs are control freaks, and I think that there's some horrible stories about people working with dramaturgs, as if the dramaturg thinks the whole thing is about them, and it isn't. It really isn't. It's about responsibility for me. It's the writer's responsibility to get the script ready for rehearsal. It's not the dramaturg's responsibility. It's the writer's responsibility. So as a dramaturg, it's my responsibility to support the play, support the script, and to support the writer to get the script ready.
The horror stories that you say, that I wouldn't ask you to share any particular ones, but does that involve tension between dramaturg and writer, or dramaturg and theatre or production company, or does that involve just a butchering? Did they get it wrong? How would they get that wrong?
Well, those dramaturgs that work for theatre companies, that are employed by a theatre company, they make like a bridge, I think, between, let's say, the mission statement or the reason to be of the theatre and the writer's work. I think we do work in a collaborative art form, and it works best when we're all telling the same story, when costume and marketing and director and actors and writer all tell the same story. So I think a dramaturg that works within a theatre company can help with that bridging, if you like. It's the director's job as well, but the dramaturg is especially responsible for making sure that the writer is writing a play that company can put on. I think sometimes I work with just writers sort of employ me as writers. So at that time, I'm just trying to help them make a fantastic calling card or an irresistible piece of theatre. But when a theatre is involved, it changes. It does change. But as for disasters, I think disasters happen all the time in the performing arts. It's collaborative, but we don't always collaborate very well. If we could collaborate very well, there wouldn't be war in Ukraine. There wouldn't be conflict in the Middle East. There wouldn't be sectarian division in Northern Ireland if we could collaborate. This is, for me, why I work in theatre, because I believe in collaboration. I believe in solving problems as a group. And that's why I believe in dramaturgy. I believe that two people at least can talk about ideas and resolve problems.
Maybe just for completeness, you mentioned a little bit about, you just mentioned Canada and Germany and how they have slightly more developed models. Could you just elaborate on that slightly, compared to the UK, I mean?
Well, I think in Germany, following on from the time of Brecht, that's when a dramaturg had a proper role within the theatre. I think in Britain we were many years later in coming to that. I think, if you like, the arrogance of the director and the arrogance of the writer. Why do we need anybody else getting involved in this? Why should we? I can do it all. Like a lot of directors won't bring in a movement director. I can do that. But I think what we know is if we surround ourselves with good people, there's a much better chance of making great art. And I think Canada has a very established society of dramaturgs. So they meet, they talk about how to dramaturg well, they talk about how plays work. Often in the UK, we're quite isolated as directors and writers. I know as a director, I very rarely see the work of other directors. And as writers, we don't often we do now. We have the internet and we can see the podcasts on the YouTubes. But there was a time when a writer would never see how another writer worked, and that's quite limiting. That does put us in a little bubble with just our own thoughts.
I suppose a lot of it speaks to the team, doesn't it? You know, if you've, again, sort of harking back to what I said earlier about the currency of a name, you know, the director who's got a big following, or the writer who's got a big following. But actually, if you look beyond them a little bit into their team, there's nearly always a team. The director always works with the same lighting designer, the same costume, or the same handful. Everyone's got their team of people that they know that they chime with, I suppose, isn't it?
Yes, and I work with a man called Stephen Colella, who works at YPT in Toronto, and he's been the dramaturg on 5 or 6 of my pieces, and often, even when I'm not writing for his company, I will send him some work because I just know he has a good eye. He's got a fierce logic about him. He has a clarity about him that, even though I talked earlier on about being logical, actually I'm not. I'm all over the place like most writers are. We get in front of the keyboard and our brain can go bing, 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 and suddenly we're writing a load of crazy stuff. Stephen's very useful in saying, why does that character do that there? And I go, I don't know. It was just the idea I had at the time. So that questioning, I think that's what dramaturgs do more than anything else. They ask us as writers, what's that there for? What's the function of that scene? What is this scene doing? What is the end of this character's arc? Are we really writing about depression? Is a dream the best way to open up the inside of this character? You know, those questions are useful, aren't they?
Kevin, this has been a fantastic introduction to what is dramaturgy. We are running out of time, but I would like to perhaps end by just asking you what you're up to currently, next. I know you've just come out of rehearsals for something, and any final thoughts that you want to give over.
Yeah, I think the last thing on dramaturgy, if you like, is I think the job of the dramaturg is to say, I'm with you on this. I can help you find out how this thing ends, and I can help you get there in the best way. If someone says that to me as a writer, I'm going to go, okay, I'll listen to you. Next for me is a few years ago I wrote 10 short plays for young performers aged between 16 and 25 for a company in the northwest of England. It was great having to write 10 tiny plays. And they've just asked me to write 6 more, and they're plays for Generation Z. And they're little two-handers about the big things in young people's lives. And I loved writing the first 10, so I'm going to love writing the next 6.
How are you going to research that, Kevin? Have you got some Gen Zers in your life that you can ask?
I run a writing workshop with teenagers every week, and they just fill me with stuff. They fill me with stories. And I've got 2 sons, one's 30, one's 25. So that's my way in.
That's good.
And we've all been Generation Zs at one time in our lives, haven't we? Tell me we've still got some of that youth inside us. Tell me.
Oh, the youth, yeah, absolutely, that wonderful confidence and energy, but we didn't have iPhones when I was that young. That's changed everything, social media and phones and the internet, I think. Okay,
it's been a delight to be here today. It's been really lovely. And I just wish you all the best.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you so much for coming on and joining our little podcast world. Ed's having a few technical difficulties, so I will wrap everything up. Ed's waving frantically at the camera, so I'll wish all of our listeners a lovely Christmas, if that's your thing, or whatever you do over this time of year, and a very happy New Year when you get there. And we will see you next time for How to Build a Theatre.
Goodbye.
Oh, he's got there.
Bye-bye.